On February 10, 2020, 6-year-old Faye Marie Swetlik came home from school in Casey, South Carolina, and went outside to play near her home. Less than an hour later, she was gone. 3 days after that, investigators found her body, only a short distance away. Police eventually said they knew who was responsible, but even after the case was officially closed, one crucial question remained unanswered. How did Faye disappear so quickly from her own neighborhood? According to reporting based on Casey Department of Public Safety investigative records, Faye returned home from Springdale Elementary School and was seen outside during the late afternoon. Witnesses placed her near her townhouse between roughly 3:30 and 4 p.m. One neighbor even remembered seeing her near the parking area shortly before she vanished. Then, suddenly, there were no more confirmed sightings. Around 4:20 p.m., Faye's mother began looking for her. By approximately 4:55 p.m., police had been called. Officers arrived minutes later. That means investigators were dealing with an extremely narrow window. Faye had not disappeared overnight, or during a long period when nobody knew where she was. She had been visible in the neighborhood, and then, within minutes, she was missing. That narrow timeline is one of the most disturbing parts of this case. Police immediately began searching Churchill Heights. The search quickly grew larger, involving local officers, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, Lexington County authorities, urban search teams, and eventually, the FBI. The FBI later discussed Faye's case publicly in an episode of Inside the FBI, describing the intense effort to locate her. At that stage, investigators were still treating this as a missing child case. They searched streets, wooded areas, homes, vehicles, and the surrounding neighborhood. Residents were questioned. Surveillance footage was reviewed. Search teams moved through areas close to Faye's home, again and again. But one person, living extremely close to Faye, would soon become central to the investigation. His name was Cody Scott Taylor. Taylor was 30 years old and lived in the same neighborhood very close to Faye's townhouse. Police initially said he was not a relative, family friend, or known associate of Faye's family. In other words, there was no immediate public reason to identify him as an obvious suspect. And this is where the case becomes especially unsettling. While Faye was still missing, investigators actually entered Taylor's townhouse. According to investigative records later obtained and reported by the state, Taylor's roommate allowed officers inside on February 12th while Taylor was away. At that moment, investigators did not yet understand how important the residence would become. Think about that for a second. Police were searching for Faye. They were physically inside a home that would later become connected to her disappearance. But they still did not have the evidence needed to know what had happened. This is why hindsight can be misleading in true crime cases. Once we know the ending, every clue looks obvious. During the actual investigation, those same clues may look completely ordinary. Then, on the morning of February 13th, everything changed. Investigators searched trash connected to Taylor's residence. According to police, they recovered a child's polka dot rain boot. That immediately mattered, because Faye had been reported missing while wearing polka dot rain boots. But that was not the only unusual item. Investigators also recovered a soup ladle containing freshly dug dirt. Now, police had two pieces of evidence that demanded immediate attention: a missing child's boot and an object carrying fresh soil. Investigators focused on the area surrounding Taylor's residence. Shortly before 10:30 that morning, Casey Public Safety Director Byron Snellgrove discovered Faye's body in a wooded area nearby. After 3 days of searching, the missing child investigation had become a homicide investigation. But investigators quickly concluded something else. They did not believe Faye had been killed where her body was found. Evidence suggested that her body had been moved into that wooded area during the early morning hours of February 13, shortly before investigators discovered it. That meant someone had apparently concealed her elsewhere before moving her. And then, almost immediately after Faye was found, police received another emergency call. A bleeding man had been seen near Taylor's residence. That man was Cody Taylor. Officers responded, but Taylor could not be saved. The Lexington County coroner later ruled his death a suicide. For investigators, that created a major problem. The man they were beginning to connect to Faye's death would never be questioned. There would be no interrogation, no confession, no trial, no opportunity to ask him exactly what happened during those missing minutes on February 10. So investigators had to rely almost entirely on physical evidence. And that evidence became increasingly significant. Police later announced that DNA evidence connected Faye to Taylor's apartment. According to Casey authorities, the combined evidence led investigators to conclude that Taylor had abducted and killed Faye, and that he appeared to have acted alone. The Lexington County coroner determined that Faye died from asphyxiation. Authorities said she was killed only hours after she disappeared, on the same day she went missing. That detail completely changes how you look at the 3-day search. For nearly 3 days, police, federal agents, volunteers, residents, and Faye's family were hoping she might still be somewhere, waiting to be found. But investigators later concluded that she had already been killed within hours of disappearing. And there is another part of this case that is easy to misunderstand. Police said they believed they knew who was responsible, but they did not know everything. Investigative records released after the case was closed showed that authorities were never able to determine exactly how Faye was abducted. They could not establish whether Taylor physically forced her toward his home, approached her somewhere else, or somehow convinced her to go with him. There was also no publicly established motive explaining why he targeted her. That unanswered gap is important, because it is where speculation can easily replace evidence. And speculation is not necessary here. The verified timeline is already disturbing enough. Around 4 p.m., Faye was still seen outside. Around 4:20, her mother was looking for her. By 4:55, police were being called. Inside that incredibly short period of time, investigators believe Faye encountered Taylor. What happened during those missing minutes may never be known. In July 2021, Casey authorities officially announced that the investigation was closed. They said all available evidence indicated that Cody Scott Taylor abducted and killed Faye Marie Swetlik. But closing the case did not mean every mystery had been solved. There was no surviving suspect to explain the sequence of events. There was no courtroom where evidence could be tested publicly. And investigators were left with a case where they believed they knew the offender, the general timeline, and the cause of death, but not the exact moment that connected a child playing outside to the crime that followed. For me, that is what makes Faye's case so difficult to forget. It is not because of some elaborate mystery. It is because of how ordinary everything looked immediately before it happened. A child comes home from school. She goes outside to play. Neighbors see her. Cars move through the parking area. People go about their normal afternoon. And then, within minutes, one person disappears from that ordinary scene. The FBI later used Faye's case when discussing child abduction investigations, and the difficult reality that even massive search efforts do not always produce the outcome everyone hopes for. But Faye's family also made something clear after her death. They wanted people to remember who she was, not only how she died. Faye was 6 years old. She loved dresses, fancy shoes, cats, and being outside. She was a child with a personality, a family, and a life that existed before her name ever appeared in headlines. So when we talk about this case, the most responsible conclusion is not to invent the missing pieces. Investigators found the rain boot. They found evidence connected to Taylor's home. DNA helped establish what police believed had happened, and authorities eventually closed the investigation. But one small section of the timeline remains missing. What happened between the final confirmed sightings of Faye Marie Swetlik and the moment investigators believe she entered Cody Taylor's home? Unless new evidence somehow emerges, that may be the one part of this case that never receives a complete answer. And that is what happened to Faye Marie Swetlik.